Many students find that learning the English language is not easy. English language learners may struggle to pronounce English, to learn English grammar, to memorize the meanings of English words, or to use the right metaphors or idioms. In this article, we'll talk about some of the specific features of English that language learners often struggle to master, and explain why those specific language skills are so difficult to learn. English is the most studied language in the world, with over 1 billion second language speakers worldwide. The English language, which was born in England, is now spoken globally, and in many places it functions as a lingua franca, or shared language, between people from different language backgrounds. As a result, many students today are learning English so they can work for international businesses, engage in international politics, travel the world, or just watch their favorite movies and TV shows. Interested in learning about some of the challenges that English learners face? Read on. English has been described as the language of opportunity, and by the time you get to the end of this video, we're pretty sure you'll agree. If you're currently in the throes of trying to pick a language to study at school, or you fancy taking on a new language in your spare time, we're willing to bet that the English speakers of this world would join us in giving you the following words of advice. If you have to choose one additional language to learn during the course of your years at school, make it English. Why? Let us count the ways. 1. English is one of the most widely spoken languages. Although it comes second to Mandarin in the total number of speakers, English is the language you'll be able to use most widely, as it's spoken in more countries than any other language. That means that English is the language that will give you the best return for your efforts. After all, intellectual challenge aside, there's little point putting a huge amount of time and effort into learning a language that you'll hardly ever have the opportunity to use. As well as the UK, a whopping 60 of the world's 196 countries have English as their official language. The USA, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, to name but a few. It's the language of diplomacy and the official language of the European Union, the United Nations, NATO, and the European Free Trade Association, not to mention many Commonwealth countries. What's more, English is the commonly adopted second language of people in a great many more countries, including Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Germany, and Holland. In total, around 1.5 billion people speak English worldwide, and another billion are in the process of learning it. Will you make this number even bigger by learning it yourself? 2. English will open up more opportunities for you. Being able to speak English allows you to communicate effectively in numerous countries, and this opens up lots of possibilities for you in terms of the countries you could choose to seek work in one day, not to mention travel to as a tourist. You won't have to worry about getting lost when you travel to an English-speaking country, as you'll easily be able to ask for directions, and taking guided tours, ordering food, and chatting to the locals will no longer be a source of stress. What's more, careers that involve lots of travel or international exposure, such as the airline, tourism, and film industries, use English as their official language, and many employers in these sectors are likely to require evidence of a certain level of proficiency in English before they will consider employing you. This means that if you can speak English, you'll find that you have a greater number of possible careers to choose from after you finish at university. If you're looking to develop your English speaking skills, an EFL course at one of Oxford Royale's many summer schools could accelerate your progress, as well as give you a rounded experience of English culture. You can study at the Oxford Summer School, Cambridge Summer School, London Summer School, San Francisco Summer School, and Yale Summer School. 3. English will make you more desirable to employers. Being fluent in a second language clearly demonstrates a powerful brain and reflects someone who has put in the huge amount of time, resources, and commitment needed to master another language. But while being bilingual is impressive full stop, no matter what combination of languages you speak, adding English to your CV will be particularly useful. Not only is it an especially complex language to get to grips with, a fact that reflects well on you for having mastered it, but as we've seen, it's also an incredibly useful language to learn because so many countries speak it. You'll be in a much stronger position to apply for jobs overseas if you've reached a good level of fluency in English. English has been referred to as the language of business, and it's not hard to see why. If you have ambitions to become an international business person, it's essential that you're able to speak English fluently. Business conducted internationally is done in English more often than not. Even if you're not thinking of living and working abroad, that doesn't mean you won't find English a helpful language to put on your CV. There may well be plenty of English-speaking multinational corporations with offices in your home country. What's more, English skills are just as desirable to employers in your own country and language as they are to employers in English-speaking countries. Here are just 3 examples to give you an idea of the kind of situations in which English may come in useful in your own country. Business meetings. Being able to speak English puts you in a position to be able to attend or hold international business meetings. Where several languages are represented, the chances are that the meeting will be conducted in English. And if you're the only one in your team who can speak English, you may find yourself being put forward to attend important meetings, advancing yourself up the career ladder in the process. Customer service and sales. You'll be able to help with any English-speaking customers your employer may have and sell to them. This gives you the chance to build relationships with overseas customers, and the ability to build relationships is an important business skill that puts you at an advantage over non-English speaking fellow employees and makes you more valuable to the company you work for. Marketing and communications. If the company you end up working for markets its products or services to English-speaking countries, or releases other sorts of communications such as press releases to these countries, your knowledge of English may come in handy for translating marketing materials or communications with customers or sales prospects. The cultural knowledge you'll acquire through learning English may also come in handy in knowing how to pitch products and ideas to English-speaking nations. 4. English gives you access to some of the world's best universities. English is widely regarded as the language of higher education. Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, and MIT are just a few of the famous universities that occupy the lofty heights of the top of the World Education League tables, and you'll need to speak English fluently for access to any of these, as they're all English-speaking. It goes without saying that if you are able to study at one of these institutions, you'll start your career with an illustrious name on your CV, and the benefits of that speak for themselves. If English isn't your native language, you'll need to take an English test during the admissions process to prove that your level of English is up to scratch for the demands of the academic environment. If you have your sights set on a top university, the effort you put in to study English as early as possible in your school years will be rewarded when it comes to the choice of universities to which you can apply. 5. English is the language of some of the world's greatest literature. If you learn English, you'll be able to enjoy works by some of the world's most famous writers in the language in which they were intended to be read or heard. The works of Shakespeare will take on a new meaning when you're able to speak English, and you can look forward to enjoying such influential classics as Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights and her sister's Jane Eyre, George Orwell's 1984 and Animal Farm, Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, and many, many more. Translation rarely does a writer true justice, so the only way to appreciate a classic literary work properly is to read it in its original language. Even better, through doing so, you'll deepen your knowledge of English by enriching it with new words and sentence structures. 6. English allows you to get more from popular culture. Potter, based on the famous English fantasy book series. The world's highest-grossing movies are made in Hollywood, and needless to say, they are made in English. How many times have you been to see an American blockbuster and been frustrated by having to keep up with fast-paced subtitles? And how many times have you hummed a favorite pop song, but not been able to sing along because it's in English and you don't know the words? There's a solution. Kiss those annoying cinema subtitles goodbye and get more out of the music you enjoy by learning English. 7. English allows you to attend international conferences and events. Major sporting events such as the Olympics are held in English, and so are international conferences. So competitors and delegates will need to be able to speak English to be able to get the most out of taking part. You may find yourself needing to attend conferences as part of your chosen career, so learning English now will be of enormous benefit to you in years to come. Not only will you be able to understand the talks, but you'll get a lot more out of the networking opportunities that come with such events if you can talk effectively in English. You never know. There may be a new employer or client among the crowds of fellow delegates, so make sure you can communicate with them. 8. English has a simple alphabet and everyone's equal. The Latin alphabet is the most used alphabet in the world. The English alphabet is straightforward, making it easier to master than the symbols or pictures that make up some languages. If you've struggled to learn more complex alphabets, you may find you make more progress with English, which shares an alphabet with many other languages. There are no complicated symbols and characters to get to grips with in English either. Even in French, which essentially uses the same alphabet, There are several accents used on certain letters that alter the pronunciation. Not so in English. Furthermore, not matter how important they are, everyone is addressed as you. There are no polite and informal variants to agonize over, as there are in French with tu and vous, for instance. So you won't need to worry about inadvertently creating social awkwardness by being overly familiar. And unlike many European languages, there are no masculine and feminine words to remember. It's a dog, not le chien. 9. English gives you wider access to knowledge. Did you know that 55% of the world's web pages are written in English? This absolutely dwarfs that of any other language, with the next most widely used language on the internet being Russian, which constitutes just 6% of pages. Knowledge of English therefore allows you to tap into far more of the world's intellectual resources. English is also the language of science. If you learn English, you won't just have access to a greater proportion of the vast amount of knowledge available on the web. You'll be able to educate yourself still further by being able to read scientific books and papers. English is, of course, essential if you intend to pursue a scientific career. Within the Science Citation Index, compiled by the Institute for Scientific Information, an estimated 95% of articles are written in English, despite only around half being from English-speaking countries. According to the Open University, at Oxford University, 2/3 of postgraduate students come from outside the UK. The students in the university's chemistry research lab admit that working in English is a key attraction. 10. English is a fantastic intellectual challenge. Up for a challenge? Learn English. English is undoubtedly one of the harder languages to learn. Full of nuances, unexpected pronunciations, odd rules, and infuriating exceptions to rules, it takes dedication and perseverance to reach a good level of fluency. If you're on the lookout for a new challenge, learning English may be just what you're after. Not only that, but because it's so widely spoken, it opens you up to a huge number of new cultural experiences, which will help you develop life skills, meet new people, and grow your confidence in handling new situations. Have we convinced you yet? If you've been inspired to learn English, consider enrolling on one of our English as a Foreign Language (EFL) courses, and develop your English skills in the company of like-minded students in the beautiful city of Oxford and Cambridge. 1. English is not similar to your native language. Learning English will be most difficult for students whose native language is very different from English. The more different your native language is from English, the more you will have to learn in terms of vocabulary, grammar, pronunciation, and cultural knowledge. English belongs to a large group of languages called the Indo-European languages, which includes most languages of Europe and some from the Middle East and the Indian subcontinent as well. In general, speakers of Indo-European languages will have an easier time learning English because they will recognize familiar vocabulary and grammar. However, some Indo-European languages, e.g., German, French, Norwegian, are closer to English than others, e.g., Persian, Hindi, Kurdish. So this isn't a guarantee. But if your native language is not an Indo-European language, then you're probably going to struggle a lot more to learn English words, grammar, and pronunciation. The next several list items will outline aspects of English grammar that require a lot of memorization or which are unusual in the world's languages, and so can present difficulties for learners from a wide range of backgrounds. Second English verb tenses take practice. Learning when to use different English verb tenses is notoriously difficult for English language students. The reason English verb tenses are so tricky is that they carry a lot of information about when and how something happened. It's more complicated than just past, present, and future. Let's look at some examples. 1. Emily had cried when Patrick walked into the room. 2. Emily was crying when Patrick walked into the room. 3. Emily had been crying when Patrick walked into the room. 4. Emily had cried when Patrick walked into the room. In all 4 sentences above, Emily cried at some point in the past, so the verb to cry appears in the past tense in all 4 sentences. However, did you notice that in each verb looks a little different, and in each sentence there is a slightly different relationship between the timing of the 2 different past events? In the first 3 sentences, Emily started crying before Patrick entered, while in the final sentence, the 2 things happened at the same time. In sentences 2 and 3, Emily was finished crying by the time Patrick walked in. But there's a difference between these 2 as well. In the second sentence, we're focusing more on the fact Emily cried for a period of time. In the third sentence, we're more focused on the simple fact that she cried. Can you see how it might be tricky to learn all the nuances of these differences? To use the correct English verb tense, you need to keep in mind both the tense of the verb, when it happened compared to now, past, present, future, and the aspect of the verb, which describes how that event overlapped with other events or times under discussion. This is a lot to keep in your head all at once, so it's no wonder that picking the right tense can be very confusing for students who are just starting out. 3. Choosing when to use which article is difficult. Deciding when and how to use articles in English, a and the, is usually challenging for English learners. Articles are difficult for English learners because using them correctly requires you to get inside the mind of the person that you're talking to. What does this mean? Most English teachers and learners will tell you to use a for something that isn't specific and the for something that is specific. But the story is actually more complicated than that. Let's look at an example. The mailman came into the shop today and bought an iced vanilla latte. A mailman came into the shop today and bought an iced vanilla latte. In both of these sentences, a specific person came into the shop. The difference is that in the first example, the mailman, the speaker is assuming that the person being addressed will know the mailman in question. Maybe he's the mailman who regularly delivers mail to the coffee shop. But in the second example, a mailman, we can assume that the person being addressed does not know the mailman in question. In order to use the correct article, therefore, you need to know how much information someone has about a given situation and adjust your language accordingly. If your listener can pick out the specific person or item you are referring to, then you use the. If your listener can't or doesn't need to pick it out, you use a dash. This may sound simple, but using articles correctly can be a challenge, especially for learners whose native languages don't require a choice between specific and not specific. There are other things to learn when it comes to articles. Some proper nouns must always be accompanied by articles. X, the Bahamas, the Miami Heat, while others cannot have them. X, Charles, New Hampshire. Sometimes we leave out articles after prepositions. X, at school, in prison, after lunch. While some types of nouns, like mass nouns, milk, knowledge, grass, can't occur with an. These exceptions must simply be memorized, and learning these rules can be tricky. 4. Phrasal verbs are unpredictable. Phrasal verbs are verbs made up of more than one word, usually a classic verb, x, put, kick, move, and a preposition, x, out, over, up. English is packed with phrasal verbs, and learning how to use them correctly requires a lot of practice. There are two main reasons why learning phrasal verbs can be tricky. Reason 1. Most phrasal verbs are idioms, meaning you cannot reliably guess the meaning of a phrasal verb just from the meaning of its parts. Let's look at some of the phrasal verbs based on the verb to pick. Notice that while you might be able to predict a few of these meanings based on the meaning of the preposition, x, pick up, pick apart, most of them have meanings that need to be memorized. Pick out to choose, pick up to lift up in your hand, or to receive a signal. Pick over to search thoroughly through a selection of options. Pick on to bully, pick apart, to break something carefully into pieces, literally or figuratively. Pick up on, to notice, pick at, to take small bites of your food, not really eat it. Pick off to eliminate something one by one, pick through to search carefully within a mess. Reason 2. Different phrasal verbs follow different grammar rules. As you can see in the examples below, some phrasal verbs can be split apart while others cannot. Learners simply have to memorize which phrasal verbs belong to each group. Let's look at some examples. These phrasal verbs can be split apart. Sarah knocked over the can. Sarah knocked the can over. Mark picked up his kids from school. Mark picked his kids up from school. These phrasal verbs cannot be split apart. Sarah looked after Mark's kids. Sarah looked Mark's kids after. Mark got over his cold. Mark got his cold over. Because phrasal verbs require a lot of memorization, both in terms of what they mean and how they're used, these types of verbs are often a hurdle for language learners. 5. Negative sentences and questions are challenging English questions. What does Ken like? And negative sentences, Ken does not like cheese, are usually challenging for language learners. Questions and negative sentences in English are so difficult because they can have a different word order and sometimes involve changing the form of a verb. We can see this when we compare the word order of a question to the regular sentence you would use to answer it. Have a look at these examples. Is Ken eating cheese? Ken is eating cheese. What is Ken eating? Ken is eating cheese. Who is eating cheese? Ken is eating cheese. Did Ken eat cheese? Ken ate cheese. What did Ken eat? Ken ate cheese. We can also see this when we compare the negative form of a sentence with the positive form. Ken is eating cheese. Ken is not eating cheese. Ken ate cheese. Ken did not eat cheese. If you want to correctly form English questions and negative sentences, you need to learn the rules for changing verbs and word order. These rules take a lot of practice, especially for learners coming from languages which may not alter the word order or verb forms at all in order to form these types of sentences. Sixth, English spelling is confusing. English spelling is one of the most difficult things for English language learners to master. English speakers like to think that we spell things the way they sound, but there are a lot of exceptions. There are places where the same sound is spelled differently in different words, X, bread and bed, or the same spelling has different pronunciations in different words, X, fig and sigh. There are lots of silent letters, X, who, ride, psychology, and sometimes groups of letters have unpredictable pronunciations, X, GH in rough, che in chemistry. Learning to spell and to pronounce words can take a lot of work, even for native English speakers, and is especially tough if you're just starting out. Here's an example of how confusing English spelling can be. Did you know that, if you wanted to, you could spell the word fish as goti? Seems a little ridiculous, right? But let me show you how. 1. The word enough ends with an F sound, so GH can be pronounced F. 2. The O in the word women is pronounced more like an I, so let's use O next. 3. In words like ignition, the TI sounds like an eshe, so we'll use that at the end. Put that all together, and we get GH plus O plus TI, fish. You can see why English spelling might be hard to learn. There are several reasons why English spelling is a bit of a mess. Depending on the dialect someone speaks, English uses between 16 and 25 different vowel sounds, but we only have 5 to 6 letters to use to write them, A, E, I, O, U, Y. This means that we have to get creative about showing which sound each vowel represents. Can you hear all the different vowels in beat, bit, bait, bet, bat, bot, boot, boat, bite, butt, and bought? English borrows words from a lot of different languages and sometimes uses their original spellings, even when those other languages follow different spelling rules. Just think about words like foe or psychology. English words are usually spelled the way they were pronounced in the mid-1500s, since that was when we decided on the correct spelling. Often, silent letters represent sounds that used to be pronounced, e.g., knife used to be pronounced ku-nif-a. English spelling is fun for those of us who like to study the history of languages, but it can be quite a bummer for people who are learning to spell English. 7. English idioms are everywhere. Learning how to use and understand English idioms is crucial if you want to use English in the real world. Idioms are set phrases whose meaning you cannot usually predict, even if you know the meanings of each word in the phrase. Because the meanings of idiomatic phrases must be memorized separately from the meanings of words, idioms can be a fly in the ointment for people trying to learn English. Did you see that? I used an idiom. The English phrase, a fly in the ointment, can be used to describe any annoying circumstance that causes problems in an otherwise good plan. Just like idioms can cause problems for your plan to learn English. It is an idiom because it doesn't refer to actual flies getting stuck in actual ointment. English learners need to learn idioms because idioms are everywhere in English. Have a look at the sort of pep talk a coach might give his losing basketball team. Here's the deal, team. I know you all expected winning this game to be a piece of cake, but now here we are, 30 points down in the second half. So I'm going to need you all to step up and chip in so we can win this game. We haven't missed the boat on winning this tournament yet. Come on, guys, let's blow them out of the water. Let's look at the meanings of all those idioms. Idiom. Meaning, here's the deal. This is the plan, juice situation, a piece of cake, something very easy. Step up to the plate. Take responsibility in a crisis chip. Put your own energy into a goal. Miss the boat, miss an opportunity, blow them out of the water, seriously impress or defeat someone. English courses often focus on teaching students how to assemble literal sentences, sentences that mean what you'd expect them to mean. As a result, many English language learners are left to learn to use non-literal language, like idioms, outside the classroom, through conversations with native speakers, watching movies, or reading books. This can mean that even learners who do very well in a classroom setting will struggle with things like idioms when they start using English in the real world. One of the best ways to learn to use any language naturally is to consume media in the language you're trying to learn. So, if you're trying to learn English idioms, try reading a book, listening to a podcast, watching TV shows or movies, or even just spending time on English language social media. 8. English has irregular verbs, and plurals can surprise you. Learning to use irregular verbs and irregular plurals is difficult for most English language learners because it requires a lot of memorization. Irregular words are those that do not follow conventional grammar rules. For example, sing is an irregular verb because the past tense is sang and not singed. Mouse has an irregular plural form because the plural of mouse is mice, not mouses. Learning to use regular verbs and plurals is quite easy. Once you've learned the pluralization rule, add s or es, and the past tense rule, add ed, all you need to do is plug new words into each rule. You know that the plurals of fox, cup, and table are foxes, cups, and tables, and that the past tenses of walk, meow, and toss are walked, meowed, and tossed. But you cannot do the same thing with irregular verbs and plurals. With irregular words, each word must be memorized on its own. You just have to memorize that the plural forms of man, loaf, and fish are men, loaves, and fish. And you just have to memorize that the past tense forms of is, bring, and have are was, brought, and had. There are some tips and tricks you can use to learn English irregular plurals and irregular verbs, but even if you learn these tricks, you'll probably need to spend some time with your flashcards. All languages have irregular words, and English doesn't have any more than is normal. But learning them for the first time still requires a lot of memorization, which can be quite a hurdle. 9. English has a large and diverse vocabulary. Most linguists would tell you that English has a larger and more diverse vocabulary than most other grammatically similar languages. The size and diversity of the vocabulary of English presents several different challenges to English language learners. The 1989 full edition of the Oxford English Dictionary contains over 250,000 individual entries. This means that there are at least 250,000 words in English. That's a lot of words. Now, most English learners don't need to learn anywhere close to 250,000 words in order to function on a day-to-day basis. Researchers estimate that most native English speakers can only actively use somewhere between 15,000 and 60,000 words. But even that is a lot to learn. Because English has so many words, memorizing enough vocabulary to sound fluent takes a long time. English is spoken all over the world, and it has long been spoken by people from a wide variety of language backgrounds. Before English started spreading all over the world, it already had its own complete vocabulary. But as English has acquired new speakers, it has also acquired new words from all of those new speakers' native languages. The result is that today, words of English origin make up less than 25% of our modern vocabulary. The diversity of English's vocabulary not only means that English language students have more words to learn, students must also learn a lot of grammar and spelling exceptions that are associated with borrowed words. Words that come from non-English languages often follow slightly different rules from words that are native to English. For example, if a noun is borrowed from Latin or Greek, we usually don't follow the normal English pluralization rule, add an S, and instead follow these rules. Rule example, replace, us with I alumnus, alumni replace, with a datum, data replace, a with ae larva, larvae replace, x with ices matrix, matrices replace, on with a criterion, criteria. The size and diversity of the English vocabulary therefore not only presents challenges to learners' ability to memorize words, but also to their ability to remember grammatical and spelling exceptions. What are some tips for learning English easily? The best way to learn English is to find the type of course or learning materials that fit your lifestyle. You can learn English with a face-to-face course from a good series of recorded lessons, by reading books or online articles, or by using an app like Mango. If you are just starting out, try to find a course taught in your native language. Learning English with Mango. We offer English courses taught in a variety of languages, including Bengali, Hatian, Creole, Hmong Chinese, Mandarin, Cantonese, Arabic, MSA, Egyptian, Armenian, French, German, Greek, Italian, Japanese, Korean, Polish, Portuguese, Russian, Somali, Spanish, Turkish, Vietnamese. Learning English requires the same skills as learning any other language. So, if you follow all the methods for learning English that we discussed in our comprehensive guide to learning a language, you'll be all ready to learn English as easily as possible. How hard is it to study English? While some things about learning English are hard, the good news is that it is easy to find opportunities to study English. English is the most studied second language in the world, with over 1 billion second language speakers worldwide, so you should be able to easily find courses, books, apps, online lessons, and many other resources wherever you are. You'll still have to work hard if you want to learn English, but at least you won't need to struggle to find materials and courses to help you along the way. What is the most challenging part of learning English? Most English language learners will find it challenging to learn English verb tenses, phrasal verbs, articles, spelling, pronunciation, and idioms. This is because these are features of English that are very different from most other languages in the world, or which simply require a lot of memorization. Keep in mind that the languages you already speak affect what about English is difficult for you. The things that will be most difficult for you are the things that English does very differently from your native language. For example, in Persian, there is only one pronoun for humans, au, u, he, she, which can be applied to both men and women. If Persian is your native language, then you might have to work hard to remember to use he and she appropriately, because it's not something you have had to think about doing before. However, speakers of Spanish would not struggle with this at all, as Spanish also has a distinction between masculine and feminine pronouns, él, he, ella, she, and so this feature of English seems only natural. Because speakers of different languages will run into different sorts of challenges when learning English, it can be helpful to find an English course that is designed specifically for learners who speak your native language.